Hi, if you're somebody that's trying to heal a condition, right? And you're doing everything right, you're taking your supplements, you're exercising, maybe you're getting some therapy, everything right, but it's just not healing or it's not healing fast enough. There's a high probability that you've got a problem with your adrenal system, and that's what I want to talk about today. And a lot of people forget about the adrenal system, but it's so important. 90% of my patients that I deal with have a problem with the adrenal system. And until we go in and we strengthen that system, they just don't get the results that they want, or the results I should say that they need. Now, the adrenals are these two little glands that sit on top of the kidneys, and they're tiny, but they have a profound effect on your body's ability to balance stress and also to heal. And a lot of people forget that the adrenals are directly related to healing. They produce some hormones that we need to talk about. First and foremost, they produce adrenaline, also known as epinephrine. This is a hormone that helps with short-term bursts of energy. And it does all the things we would expect from sympathetic activation, right? Vasoconstriction, a big boost of energy. Adrenaline is something that you would produce if you were in a burning house and you had to run outside quickly, or if you're about to get into a physical fight with somebody, or if you got very excited, your body would produce adrenaline. And this is only meant to be produced short-term, and it's designed for a short-term burst of energy in an emergency situation. The second hormone we want to talk about that's produced by the adrenals is cortisol. And we've all heard of cortisol. Cortisol is very interesting. So the first use of cortisol is when we need a sustained long-term production of energy. We use cortisol. So it's very different from adrenaline, which is short-term production of energy. Cortisol is long-term production of energy. But cortisol is also a really good anti-inflammatory. And so when we're hurt or when we're in pain, when our body is inflamed, we produce cortisol to help dampen that inflammation. And that's a good thing. However, as with all good things, if this gets out of balance and our body's producing too much cortisol or not enough cortisol, we get disorders. In fact, if we're not producing enough cortisol, we can develop a disease called Addison's disease. And if we're producing too much cortisol, we produce something called Cushing's disease. And these are serious conditions. And if you have that, you should speak to your physician, of course. But the idea is that cortisol is very good. It's very good for our body, but it's involved in the regulation of healing and the regulation of long-term energy. Thirdly, we produce a hormone called aldosterone. And aldosterone helps to balance the potassium and the sodium balance in our system. That's important because that's a big regulator of blood pressure. And so if your adrenals are not working properly, your blood pressure could be all over the map. You could have high blood pressure, low blood pressure. You could have inability to regulate blood pressure. So when you get up out of a chair, for example, to walk, your blood pressure needs to go up. If it's not doing that, you'll feel dizzy, lightheaded, and this could be a problem with your adrenal glands. In fact, one of the early ways we used to check for problems with the adrenal system is we'd have somebody lie down and we would take their blood pressure. And we would note their systolic or their high number. Let's say that was 115 or something like that while they were laying down. Then we would have them stand up. We would take their blood pressure a second time. And that high number should go from 115 in this case to about 120. Should go up by like 10 points or more. Because as you stand up, you need to have higher blood pressure in order to maintain the system. But if you have a problem with your adrenals, if the adrenal system is fatigued or sick, you don't get that increase in blood pressure when you stand. In fact, in a lot of patients, it goes down. It's called postural hypotension. And if you have that, it's a pretty good indication that you've got a problem with these adrenals, with this adrenal system. Finally, there's another hormone called DHEA that is produced with the adrenals. Now, DHEA is a precursor to sex hormones. So that's pretty important. Wouldn't you agree? But the sex hormones are really used in this case for repair of muscle and tissue. So if you're not producing enough DHEA in those adrenals, it's just not going to be possible for you to repair the soft tissues of the body. And so as you can see, that whole adrenal system is critical, right? Now, we mentioned Cushing's disease and Addison's disease as some conditions that are associated with the adrenal system. But there's a third, and it's a bit controversial, and I like to just call it adrenal dysfunction. And what this means is that essentially the adrenal glands are structurally sound. The tissues look healthy, they're structurally sound, but they're not functioning correctly. So something's off. And a lot of people will refer to this as adrenal fatigue or adrenal dysfunction. And this is a big problem because I see it in more than 80% of my patient base. That's a big number. And if you have adrenal fatigue or adrenal dysfunction like this, then you're just not going to be optimal for healing. And it's going to be a big problem. There's a couple of ways you can test for this. Like I mentioned before, the blood pressure test, you can try that. If you really want an objective finding, you can get a saliva test. We take some saliva, we check it for those hormones, and we see where your cortisol is. Is it peaking in the morning or is it not peaking? And by mapping out those hormones, we can see if the adrenals are healthy or if they're not healthy. But to be honest with you, in my experience, after doing this for 20 years, the signs, the symptoms, they're almost always correct. So the first sign of a problem with your adrenals, as I mentioned, is you're just not healing. So if you are not healing and you're a person that's doing everything to heal and your condition's not getting better, right away I would recommend looking into the adrenals. And we're going to get to what you can do in just a moment. Secondly, if you're irritated, if you're an irritable person and you're short-fused and people are telling you that you're a bit of a pain in the you-know-what to be around, if you're always irritated and on edge, it's probably the adrenals because those adrenals help regulate that, right? If you're somebody that's having problems with blood pressure, where you're dizzy a lot, or where you're finding blood pressure goes really high and goes really low, and you're deregulating, you're not regulating your pressures. Remember, we talked about that hormone, that aldosterone hormone produced by the adrenals. It's probably an adrenal problem. And finally, if you're wound up but exhausted, now think about what I'm saying. It sounds like a paradox, but if you're somebody that's just wound up but just exhausted all the time, and if you're a person who has this, then you know what I mean. If you're wound up and exhausted, I'm going to guess it's the adrenals. I'm so confident that it's adrenals that if a patient has these symptoms, I don't even test for the saliva anymore. I don't even test it. For the sake of a bottle of supplementation, I put them on that adrenal support for a couple of weeks, and in most cases, their other symptoms improve. And so I know that I was right in doing that. Now, when we're talking about how to approach the adrenals, what we can do to really get them dialed in, there are 3 products I want to talk about. First and foremost is a desiccated adrenal gland supplement. And this is going to be for short-term use only. This is going to be the pure adrenal gland that's been ground up, dehydrated, and you take this, and what this does is basically gives your body all of those hormones that you're lacking, right? Because your adrenals are not producing them. So it gives you this immediate burst of energy and this immediate bump, if you will. And in the old days, I would put patients on this for about 2 weeks, and then I would segue them into a different product that I'm going to talk about, a product called DRENAMINE, which is more of a long-term support product. Now, I hate to say it, but most people will need a desiccated adrenal gland for 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks. I've had a patient that had to take it for 8 weeks before we could switch them over to DRENAMINE. So why is that? Stress is a lot more, right? We're dealing with a lot more stress these days, a lot more environmental stress, a lot more mental stress, a lot more, did you get that? I said a lot more environmental stress and a lot more mental stress, right? And a lot more physical stress. Environmental stress, the toxins in the environment, in the food. This could be a whole video that I won't go down that rabbit hole, but the point is, we're definitely under more stress today than we've ever been. And as a result of that, I see it clinically because patients just don't get the results with 2 weeks of desiccated adrenal. Now they need 4 to 8 weeks. So the first product is take the desiccated adrenal gland, take it for 2 weeks, see how you feel. If you're not quite there yet, don't be worried, go another 2 weeks. Now, once you've had your 2 to 4 weeks of that desiccated adrenal extract supplement, then we want to switch over to something we can use long term, which is going to be a product called DRENAMINE. DRENAMINE is a combination of a little bit of the adrenal, the desiccated adrenal glandular, also mixed with all the cofactors. So you're going to have vitamin C and all that nutrition that you need to feed the adrenal gland. You're going to have that as well. And that's going to support the adrenals long term. With that also, there is another product in there called a PMG, which stands for protomorphogen. And I've talked about protomorphogens in the past. And the protomorphogen is basically a cellular blueprint for the organ that's damaged. So in this case, we're using the cellular blueprint by taking some of the DNA extract out of the adrenal and giving it to the system. And so I made a whole video on how PMGs work. You can watch that. But essentially, the PMG is the blueprint for the reconstruction and the repair of the adrenals. When we switch to Drenamine and we use the Drenamine product for a long term, we're giving it a little bit of adrenal gland to keep that going, but we're also giving it all of the vitamins and the minerals that it needs to be healthy, and we're reinforcing the blueprint to the system to remind it of how the adrenal glands are supposed to be structurally. So it's a great product for that long-term use. There is another product as well, and that is called Drenatrophin. And Drenatrophin is a pure PMG, a pure protomorphogen product. And this is going to be used if somebody has an autoimmune disease, as we mentioned, such as Addisons disease, where the gland itself is structurally damaged. It's destroyed, it's damaged, and it needs to regenerate or grow. This is where protomorphogens really shine. They give the immune system a little break if they're attacking the organ so that the body can do its innate healing. So protomorphogens are very important, and if somebody has a condition like I mentioned, like Cushing's disease or Addison's disease, protomorphogens are going to be very useful for those disorders. But they're also going to be useful if you've damaged your kidneys, specifically your adrenals, right? So if you've had something to do with a degenerative condition of those areas where over time the adrenal glands have physically, damaged and they're not structurally like they should be, then the Drenatrophin PMG is going to be the product of choice. Otherwise, I wouldn't take that. I would stick to the desiccated adrenal and the Drenamine. Hope that's useful. And I'm going to put links in the description where you can buy these products if you decide to. You can get them from my website with the links, help support the channel. You buy them directly from Standard Process. And I'm also going to mention the dosages that I recommend if you decide to help your adrenals. I hope this was useful. Please stay in touch. You can reach out to me through my website at drstephenstokes.com. Please subscribe, and thank you for watching.